We'll get the meeting started. Welcome. On our second meeting, the first one was rather quick. Le premier était un peu vite, mais c'est passé en tout cas.
But it went well.
Today is minutes of previous meetings. Everyone's had a chance to look through them. We're okay with that? It's good. Perfect. Business arising from previous meeting. Is there anything that should be brought up? Mr. Stroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker. Not sure which I'm supposed to say here. I did, and I do appreciate how rushed the December meeting was for reasons that Conservatives certainly remember. I did ask a question that I wanted to get some clarification on, just because when I went back, I couldn't make the numbers work, and again, I know we were very rushed. So I did ask a question about the reduction in the allotment in the estimates for the office of the deputy clerk, and there's a reduction of nearly $200,000. For the personal office of the Deputy Clerk Procedure, Andre Gagnon. And at the time I was told that this was because of a reallocation of the Press Gallery Secretariat to the Office of the Deputy Clerk Administration. However, looking at that had happened in the previous year. So I would like either for that to be clarified now, or for that just to flag it so that someone can give me information on what that amount what that difference is, because I believe we were talking about different years when the Press Gallery Secretariat was explained as the reason for that. So I'll just flag that. I don't know if I don't expect that the clerk was expecting that question today. So if I can just put that on the record that I would like to get some more information, I'd appreciate that. Yep.
Can we answer it now?
No, we'll look into it and make sure that we provide I want to make sure that we provide you with correct information. So rather than do something off the cuff, I will come back to you.
Thank you.
Very good. Are there any other questions concerning the business arising from previous meetings? Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions? Non, on va continuer. Numéro.
No, in that case, we'll move on. Point 3.
Special committee. On a tous signé. Alors, c'est.
We all signed. It's here. If there are no other questions, we'll move on.
Perfect. We'll move on to 4, Parliamentary Precinct. La vision et plan à.
The Parliamentary Precinct Long-Term Vision and Plan. We have a couple of presenters, Michel Patrice, Deputy Clerk, and Stéphane Aubé, Chief Information Officer. And they will give us a presentation. Gentlemen, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Susan Kolba will also speak. She'll give us an update along with Ms. Garrett. And they've worked on this issue since June.
Mr. Speaker and members of the board. Today, as Michelle said, we're joined by PSPC with Jennifer Garrett, who's the Director General responsible for the Centre Block program, and Duncan Reston, who is the ADM at PSPC. We will be providing you with an update on the LTV rehabilitation of the Centre Block since we last met in June before the summer break and election, and we have a small presentation. Mr. Patrice will be speaking to parliamentary engagement and the way forward. When we were last here, we were joined by the working group members tasked by this board to work with us as a means of engaging the Parliament and in the decision-making of the LTVP. At that time, there was a recommendation to proceed with a construction hoarding location and to develop the design for the interpretive panels. A recommendation for a scalable approach on the size of the Visitor Welcome Centre was also approved to allow Public Works to move forward with the project while allowing us time to engage with parliamentarians to develop the final functional requirements. We have been working together with PSPC over this time, doing our homework and preparing information and options for that engagement. In parallel, there have been a lot of activity going on, and Jennifer will speak to that in a little more detail. As we move forward with the functional programming and schematic design, there will be a fair number of key decisions requiring engagement and approval. We will bring to your attention some of those key elements and approaches to developing conceptual options so that we can continue to engage parliamentarians in revitalizing the center block. Our goal is to ensure that we achieve an optimal balance between restoring one of the most important heritage buildings in Canada while ensuring that it meets the future needs of parliamentarians. I'll pass on to Jennifer.
Good morning, everyone. The Center Block rehabilitation is a pinnacle project of our current long-term vision and plan, which is also under update. In terms of the program, it remains on track, and several key milestones have been accomplished since our last engagement with Boy. Enabling projects are largely now complete, allowing the construction manager the ability to commence demolition and abatement activities in support of both the rehabilitation of the center block and construction of Phase 2 Visitor Welcome Center. We've commenced the excavation of underground infrastructure to ready for large-scale excavation activities that will come in the near future. The assessment program, the comprehensive assessment program to understand the building condition, is now complete. Results of this program will be outlined later in this briefing and have been integrated into the ongoing schematic design process. This program has provided valuable information and enabled the team to safely commence the demolition and abatement that I referred to earlier. In collaboration with the administration of the House of Commons, we have advanced the functional program and launched the schematic design process. We are now at the point of input for parliamentarians in order to make the key decisions that have been referenced and will be discussed later in this presentation to allow completion of the schematic design process and continuance of the rehabilitation program. I think we're going to move to slide 7, please. The rehabilitation of the center block endeavors to provide modern accommodations to support parliamentary operations while retaining core heritage elements of the building. The scope has 2 main elements. Firstly, to modernize the center block so that it can support parliamentary operations well into the 21st century. And secondly, to construct Phase 2 of the Visitor Welcome Center, which will do primarily the following. It will establish a security screen, a safe security screen outside the center block building footprint. It will provide additional parliamentary support space. It will connect the triad, the center block, the east block, and the west blocks into one integrated parliamentary complex. And it will enhance parliamentary outreach by providing a curated parliamentary visitor experience program that will supplement the current tours that are ongoing on the Hill. The visual that you see on your screen represents just a high-level visual impact of how that Visitor Welcome Center will not necessarily be constructed in that actual footprint, but how that enables the connection of the triad into one parliamentary complex. Next slide, please. I think we're moving to slide 9, which is the slide 4, which is up on the screen, but should be slide 9 in the comprehensive deck we understand was distributed to members. A very big aspect of reducing risk on a large-scale heritage program like this rehabilitation is to find out as much as possible about the building and have that information influence the schematic design and downstream construction activities. Based on lessons learned and a best practices approach, the assessment program for this rehabilitation has been the most comprehensive undertaken to date in the precinct. The program was launched in 2018 before the relocation of parliamentary operations from the center block to the west block. But given their invasive nature, the program significantly increased in momentum and was completed once the center block was emptied. This program, as I indicated, is now at an end, and its findings have already been incorporated into the schematic design process. So moving to the next slide. Just to give you a sense, this slide summarizes the key findings that we have taken out of the program, but maybe just to bring to attention the members, a highlight of the few high-level key takeaways. We have gained a comprehensive understanding of the heritage elements, which will enable the project team to develop a robust restoration strategy. We have determined that the underlying structural steel is in better condition than expected in many areas, which will create efficiencies during the structural reinforcement process. We know where the underground infrastructure is, the associated site conditions, and we are now clear for digging from an archaeological perspective. And we know in great detail the type and location of designated substances, so we can develop a comprehensive abatement strategy. The biggest challenge or key challenge that has come out of the assessment program for us, and it's not insignificant, is we were really hoping that when we started to dig behind walls and look above the ceilings, that we would find some room to provide modern building infrastructure like heating and cooling. And unfortunately, we have found very little space to run these services. Despite this, we will be able to address these challenges. We will just have to use innovative approaches to do that. And we were already working with organizations like the House of Commons Administration and their ITPMO organization, our designer, to address those challenges and find ways to run modern services through the building. Moving to the next slide, please. Addressing and modernizing the building modernization is only one aspect of the program. As previously indicated, we've been working with parliamentary administrations on their respective parliamentary functional programs. In this case, it also involves the Senate of Canada in terms of a key client and the Library of Parliament. We are at the point now where we're coming to you today to start the engagement process, to get your views, to incorporate them into the decision-making process so that we make sure that the building, when it's returned to you, both functions from a building modernization perspective, but effectively meets the needs of parliamentarians well into the 21st century. From a design perspective, and we will get into more key decisions later on in the presentation, but we are looking in front of us are challenging decisions such as the size and configuration of the House of Commons chamber, including public lobbies and galleries, and the space and location of parliamentary offices and committee rooms throughout the new complex. For the Visitor Welcome Center, we're looking to establish, with your input, the size and operational functionality of that facility, and look at the location, configuration, and entry points for both public and parliamentary business into that complex. At this point, I'm going to transfer the presentation back to my colleague Susan Kalba to take you through the chamber.
Thank you, Jennifer. So the House of Commons chamber is one of the most significant spaces in the centre block. It's where Parliament resides, where you work. It holds symbolic and traditional significance to Canada, and as well, it's one of the most recognized spaces within the building. It's one of the key elements which will require some consultation. The House has been working with PSPC and the design consultants over the break to do our homework, notably with respect to the chamber, galleries, and lobby, so that we could be well prepared to engage and start the conversation with parliamentarian about these spaces. The chamber requires change. We need to consider the long-term use and the investment and focus on what kind of change and how best to achieve this. Our approach was to start with basic information on the existing chamber, the Fair Representation Act, and feedback that we have received to date from parliamentarians, including PROC. And there are a number of common trends from members so far. In doing our homework, we have considered the Fair Rep Act, which came into effect in 2015, and it indicates that the average demographic projections would put the MP count at about 460 in roughly 50 years from now. By the time we return to Centre Block, the projections could put the growth in a range of 350 to 370 for the number of MPs. Knowing that the growth will need to be accommodated for future parliaments, there are a number of considerations to help achieve that. We could change the seating and the furniture, we could adjust procedures to be more flexible, or we could increase the size of the chamber. These considerations emphasize the tension between space, functionality, accessibility, and heritage. Key decisions regarding the chamber are required early in the project and during schematic design, because this direction will impact the structural design, which comes first. We'll also need to consider many of the elements in terms of life safety. They don't currently meet code, and we need to take all that into account while we're considering other factors. There will need to be interventions to the heritage fabric of these spaces. to accommodate the many requirements. What will be important is how we do that. We need to do that in an appropriate manner. We need to do that respectfully and complementary to the original Pearson design, while building a new layer of lasting heritage relevant to your time in Parliament and the history of the building. So to do that, we need to have great consultation with parliamentarians to achieve that successfully. Given the challenge of addressing all those issues, we've undertaken studies on the chamber with all that basic information, and we've developed options to demonstrate the range of possibilities. And those options are at a conceptual level, but we'd like to engage further with in-depth consultations to develop the direction on which way to proceed. Next slide, please. As mentioned earlier, the Visitor Welcome Center had a preliminary approval by the board for a scalable size so that Public Works could continue with the project, but we still need to come back and work on the functional requirements with the House of Commons, the Senate, the Library of Parliament, and PPS. The building is a welcome center and is an important element for security and interconnection of the buildings on the hill, which all work together to accommodate the key functions of Parliament. Over the break, the parliamentary partners continued to work with PSPC on two key elements of the Visitor Welcome Center. Firstly, to refine the functional requirements and further develop the three options for consideration and in-depth consultation, and the final program requirements to determine the final size. Secondly, to study the entrance design strategy to ensure that the Visitor Welcome Center Phase 2 works in concert with the existing buildings and key entrances, which will remain in Centre Block, and to focus on providing secure and efficient entry for parliamentarians, business visitors, and the public, while meeting the operational functionality and considering intervention in the heritage landscape. We will be seeking input from parliamentarians on their view of the public entrance and your requirements for meeting and greeting constituents in the Visitor Welcome Center. We will be discussing in depth the advantages and disadvantages of each to ensure the most suitable option is pursued for further development in the schematic design. Thank you.
So, next slide. Alors, les décisions, vous voyez, on...
Key decisions for you? No. We're presenting decisions which we believe parliamentarians should be involved in, should be consulted on, and ultimately make the decisions. Several decisions will be required over the coming months to move the project forward.
To go into all those decisions, and obviously the objective of this meeting is not to get one decision on any of those topics, but just to give you a sense of what needs to be reviewed to come to designing the program and designing the building. The governance is more the objective, I would say, in terms of putting that on the board's agenda to discuss and obtain direction on where the board wants to go. In a simplified way, the governance for the parliamentary precinct involves many players. Le pouvoir législatif, en l'occurrence dans ce cas-ci.
The legislative branch, i.e. the House of Commons, will determine the requirements in terms of the building itself and offices. Then there is the executive branch, which is responsible for the carrying out of the work and for budgets. Clearly, there are other stakeholders such as Heritage Canada, the NCC, and the City of Ottawa.
In the details, that is simplified, but when it's time to really get to answers, discussion, and des décisions éclairées,
and enlightened decisions,
is the lead for engagement with parliamentarians. It is our responsibility to ensure that members are properly engaged to allow for the effective decision-making as it relates to defining requirements of your workplace for the next 100 years. Historically, the board has been the decision-maker for LTVP and related projects. Dans le dernier Parlement, par exemple, un groupe de travail.
In the last Parliament, a task force, a working group, was assembled to help with decision making. And this was at the excavation stage. So excavation for the future visitor center. You might remember discussions which we had back then. We didn't have a perfect model at the time, but it was a step in the right direction in terms of keeping you in the loop and helping you in your decision-making process.
Over the past year of what could be an efficient decision-making process that would ensure that members are engaged in a level of details, both on requirements and potential cost of options. Il est évident pour moi.
It's clear to me that you must be sufficiently informed so that you can feel satisfied that any decision you make is an enlightened one. Our obligation, as far as I'm concerned, as an administration, is to act transparently and to meet your needs and concerns. I would also add that it is our duty to make recommendations, and then it is up to you to take those under advisement.
The working group named by the board is a good model, but we need to reflect also on the interplay with PROC, who also has an interest in terms of the center block or the projects. So, for example, Susan has mentioned in terms of the chamber, one of the big decisions that will need to be made is whether to expand or not the chamber. This has implication, I think, is believed that it merits the study, the necessary study, to arrive at a conclusion, that members can arrive at a conclusion. So I believe that PROC would be personally well placed to do that kind of study and make recommendation to the board. So for example, if the chamber, the decision is not to expand the chamber, we know because of the growth that the rules will have to be adapted. So assigned seating, because of the growth of MPs, will no longer be possible. So there are all sorts of procedural implication that will leave, I will say, that would need to be examined in respect to the rules. Other aspect can be, I believe, the level of effort for other type of decision. For example, the visitor welcome center, as we did in the past. I suggest that for a series of the decision, it's going to take hours of discussion and iterative discussion between members and the administration and public works, so that the members, whoever that be, feel that they've got all the information necessary to make a decision in the best interest of the House of Commons, but also of Canadian and the taxpayers. So I would suggest that the level of effort of I've seen in terms of members engaged in that exercise would be a minimum probably of 2 hours per week. So I'm leaving you that at a very high level, but that's, I would see, kind of the way that everybody could work in a complementary fashion in terms of a working group, PROC, and the board itself. So I think I will leave it at that and be ready for question and.
Questions and comments? We've got a running list. Mr. Holland, followed by Mr. Rodriguez. We'll start off with Mr. Holland. And
thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker. I'm similarly confused about which title to use. So a couple of things. First of all, thank you for the work done to date. There is a project. This is a project that I think is near and dear to the hearts of all parliamentarians, but really Canadians. This is the symbol of our democracy in this country, and it's not only an enormous expenditure of money, but this building represents a really critical piece of heritage that I think all Canadians are invested in. And on that basis, the consultation that is going to take place is exceptionally important, not only for the stakeholders that are going to be using the building, members of Parliament, staff, House officials, media, and the public. But I think that heritage represents something important to people who never step foot in the building, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. So when we're trying to think about how it functions for the purposes of our work, what that heritage means to the nation, I think is incredibly important. And therefore, I have particular opinions. I won't go long into them, but my personal viewpoint is that not a lot should be changed, and we have to try to work within the existing heritage. But that'd be my viewpoint. But I think there is a body that does need to be created. I think there's a couple of things that concern me on that. One is we don't want to have two parallel processes with PROC and BOY, where we have two decision-making bodies where there's confusion. And I think the solution to that, I'm not suggesting we do it today, but I think that we're probably going to need to do it very, very soon. In fact, I would suggest that we need to have a meeting of the Board of Internal Economy because in the week that we're back to make sure that we get this issue done. Because when you start working on those timelines back, I'm hearing that we have to have a decision on the size of the chamber before we leave for the summer. Then if you think about us setting up the committee and that committee having its meetings and hearing from people, then it has to take that decision back to BOY. We don't have a very long timeline, even if you triage those decisions on the basis of which they need to be made on a prioritized basis. So I think one of the answers could be to have a committee that's populated of members of PROC, and if there's people from BOY who want to be on it, fine. We'll have to talk about its size and composition, but that would report back to this body as a decision-making body. And that there would have to be a body that actually makes recommendations opposed to just hearing input, because my fear would be that they would go and have all of these consultations and then we just get a data dump back at BOY and we'd be left trying to thrash all of this out, and we just simply don't have the time or enough meetings to be able to do that work. So it would be my hope that that body would be a body that would make recommendations back to BOY. It could be composed of members of PROC, therefore we have one decision-making channel. But given the timelines that are involved, and maybe we could flush those out, am I correct in stating that we really, without incurring costs and significant delays, need to make a decision around the size of the chamber before we leave in June?
Yes.
Okay. So just draw that backwards. That's not a lot of time. So on that basis, I think, I haven't had a chance to speak with my colleagues around the table. So I'm not suggesting we make that determination today, but I don't think, given the calendar and how it looks for March, that I don't think we can put this off until, at the end of March when we meet, because by the time we then constitute a committee, it doesn't meet until mid of April. That gives it a couple of weeks to have consultations. That's not acceptable. So I've kind of outlined my thoughts on it. I don't necessarily, but I'm open to other ideas, but I think that we do have to kind of come to a determination and create that body when we come after the constituency week in 2 weeks' time, would be my thinking. The only other point I'll mention is is a question related to the relationship with the Senate and how that's, because there's some people who are saying, have this be a joint body with the Senate. I have some concerns with that, because I think it's going to slow down the process. How, in your conception, if we had two different bodies that were making recommendations, how would that input be consolidated into one decision? Is there a need to have that consultation being done on a joint basis, or if it was done separately, how do you metabolize the recommendations from both of those bodies in such a way that they're not contradictory?
Being a shared building and a shared facility, that obviously creates another level of complexity in terms of each house setting up its requirement. So the overall project, it could have an impact. So how those dialogue takes place between the two houses, frankly, I don't really have a response. I think that our responsibility, I'm going to talk about me here, our responsibility is to basically come to you with proposal and option and listen to what your requirements are, and that are the most taxpayer responsible approach to what we're going to propose. So when you talk in terms of the visitor welcome center, so for example, if you look at the plans in the past in terms of the vision for the visitor welcome center for House of Commons requirement, it was a requirement was expressed that committee rooms would be in the visitor welcome center for the House of Commons. The team reviewing those requirements surveyed the committee rooms that we have across the precincts and the new committee rooms in this building that has been put online. It is our collective view that we don't need committee rooms in the Visitor Welcome Center. We're well served with what we have around our facilities. So this is, I think, the type of work that we can do and the challenge that ourselves need to do in terms of requirement. So it's no longer a requirement for the Visitor Welcome Center. I suspect that the other chamber may do exactly the same, but I cannot speak to.
So my thoughts are that we can't, this is so big that we can't get very deep into any of the details or we're going to get lost and never out of here. That we need to, as expeditiously as possible, create the body that is going to be responsible. I think that we need some time to talk among ourselves about what that body will look like, including the questions of how there's, and I have really big concerns with having a joint Senate process, but I don't want to get necessarily into that discussion now. I think my thought would be have a special meeting of BOI the week that we come back, 2 weeks hence. Give us an opportunity to talk about exactly how this would be composed, and then come back and make a determination in 2 weeks. That would be my recommendation.
Very good. Next on the list is Monsieur Rodriguez, suivi par Mrs. Bergen, Mr. Julian, then Madame de Bellefeuille. Monsieur Rodriguez.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to everyone. If you can refresh my memory, what was the consultation process for this building with parliamentarians? Second, I understand that eventually this room will be a future committee room. So a room similar to this one would not be needed in the center block. Did I understand 460 MPs are projected to sit in 50 years?
50 years.
50.
The average.
Can't be.
Yeah. It's based on the projections by Stats Canada, census projections, and the Fair Representation Act.
But if we're talking on a 100-year plan, then we have a number for 460. Aren't we supposed to be working for the whole period? Huh?
These are projections, obviously, and we suspect that there's a point in time where Parliament will modify the representation and the balance, but we have to work with certain figures. So, for example, if you look at one of the plan for this chamber, it was projected that there would be 320 MPs, and we're 338. So these are projections based on population growth and so on, but
You need 230 for a majority. Just saying. I won't be here in 50, but
so that's a projection, but obviously there's many things that can happen between now and then, like I said, in terms of the change of the number representation formula and all of that.
Okay.
Là, votre première question.
To your first question, consultation with MPs on this building. Well, I'll give you my personal viewpoint because I was not here when those consultations were carried out. Decisions were made when it comes to the details. Those decisions were taken by the administration. It's true that the Board of Internal Economy had seen very high-level plans, but when it came to the things that really matter, such as who gets which office, members were not consulted. And again, the distribution of rooms was done by administration, which I think was unacceptable. In this building here, there are 4 committee rooms. In one of the future plans around the house, under one of those models, there was an additional floor added to the House of Commons. But at this point here, it's premature to say that's what's going to happen, because in 10 years, the needs of the House might have changed. So when it comes to the flexibility of the House of Commons to adapt it to different uses, well, we're not there yet for that kind of discussion. That'll come up later on. I think I've addressed your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of things. First of all, I agree with much of what Mr. Holland said and the suggestions. What I would like, though, Mr. Patrice, just if you could clarify again what your suggestion was. You mentioned that the group that you were referring to needed to spend a minimum of 2 hours a week on this. So are you suggesting that there be a subgroup away from this group, or can you please sort of repeat and clarify what you think would be a good solution to
I've talked
consultation?
about-
And then I have another comment.
I've talked about a subgroup of this group, but it could be another committee established using a different route, but definitely that there's a group that dwells into the details of the project. And I estimate that the level of the effort required for that group in terms of meeting time would be a minimum of an average of 2 hours per week, because there's quite important discussion that needs to be had. The members, I will suspect, as it happened in the past working group, will say, well, I need or we want more information on this cost scenario and things like that. And then we need to prepare and then meet again and continue the discussion, pursue the discussion.
Would it be helpful, and this is just a suggestion, if after we maybe have another meeting and we have some more discussions, if BOIE sets out some guiding principles, for example, that, and I think we've heard this continuously, that we don't want the structure, we want the House of Commons and Centre Block preserved to as close as it was when we left it, to as close to that same point. If that is the guiding principle, that actually answers many, many questions. Would that be something that would be helpful, is if we set out and maybe you come back with some of those guiding principles, and then within those parameters, the working group, however it is established, or how they would in a sense have less decisions to make? Hypothetically, if that would be the guiding principle, then more floors probably wouldn't even be part of the equation. So I'm just throwing that out as a suggestion that maybe we establish some overall guiding principles and say, don't go out of these parameters, and then that would reduce some of the decision points.
Definitely guiding principles are always helpful in terms of any decision making or any person that then it can guide you. We had presented draft guiding principle in the last meeting in June, which we could distribute again as a working document, and you could then work on them in terms of, for example, the one that you're talking about. Guiding principles are helpful, but that being said, it's when you get into the granularity of things that guiding principle doesn't cover, and that's why the engagement with members is very important to us.
Yes, I agree. And when I say guiding principles, maybe that's the wrong term. I think some specific parameters that would, when I look at some of the decisions that have to be made, I mean, it goes all the way from keeping the House of Commons and the structure exactly as it is to changing it drastically.
That's right.
If we say we don't want it changed drastically, and I'm just saying that, then many of those decision points are taken off the table.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yes.
thinking more specific.
Yes.
And Mr. Julian, suivi par Madame de Bellefeuille, et ensuite Monsieur Strahl.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Attentivement toutes les.
Now, I closely looked at the presentation, and thank you so much for all of the information you've provided. It's important for us. However, I don't see any numbers, even overall budget figures. Is that because Public Works has not done the math for each of these options? Well, the person responsible for the budgets is the executive, is PSPC. Perhaps Ms. Garrett can answer that question, explain why there are no budgets at this point here.
For the question, we really do understand that cost is a critical factor in determining the decisions and informing the decisions, along with other key aspects like, as you've indicated earlier, the heritage interventions and things like that. So we would never ask parliamentarians to make decisions without understanding those cost details. Where we are in the program, though, is in terms of the functional programming, is we're here to start the engagement process to see if we've got those options right in terms of their functional capabilities in order to support parliamentary operations. And then from there, we're happy to re-engage and come back to provide you cost ranges on what that might mean. So we're at the sort of step one of a further discussion around cost to help inform the decision-making process. The other aspect I would say is the comprehensive assessment program is also a key factor. So what we learned about the building through that, and then what that will involve in terms of modernization, the combination of the functional program and the base building modernization ultimately inform a building scope. And it's only from there that you can actually baseline your cost, scope, and schedule. Because as you can imagine, it's a very big difference in terms of, just to take the chamber, for example, remaining within the existing chamber versus completely deconstructing a very significant portion of the building and rebuilding it. So we're really not trying to not provide those details, and we're happy to do those, come back with that information. We just need to know and get a better sense as part of the initial engagement as to whether or not the hard work we've done at the staff level with the House of Commons of Administration is sort of landing in terms of options that make sense operationally for Parliament.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, no doubt this is important to Canadians. It's a centre of Canadian democracy. At the same time, I represent the riding that's furthest away around this table, and most of my constituents will never come to Ottawa, so I never see the House of Commons in Parliament Hill. So it's making sure that we do justice to the centre block and to the importance of Parliament. But I certainly would disagree with any Cadillac approach where we're putting excessive funds in to the building. And so I think coming back to the comments that Ms. Bergen mentioned and Mr. Holland, I would agree with both of them, that we need to establish those principles as a starting point so that we know going in, we can provide direction. Perhaps since we don't have the figures in front of us, it's very difficult to even imagine the scope of the project right now. But putting those principles into place can make a real difference. As Mr. Holland mentioned, moving forward quickly is important because there's also a cost element in not making those decisions. And I was part of the building committee that met prior to the election. We basically went with a stripped down option, but that allowed for some flexibility about decisions post-election. And the longer we delay the decisions, the more there are costs also engendered to the taxpayers. So it's finding that balance. Moving forward, I think immediately with the principles, I agree with Mr. Holland meeting in a couple of weeks. I also agree with Mr. Holland on having real reservations of having a joint process with the Senate. We're the elected members. We're the ones that will have to justify decisions back to our voters, perhaps in a few months, perhaps in a few years. And so I think because of that, there is a principle in us certainly hearing from them, but providing the leadership on that. So moving forward quickly will be important, moving forward with principles so we can get this right and in a way that is reasonable to people across the country, including in Westminster Burnaby, people saying, yeah, they got it right on the House of Commons and the Parliament Hill. It's a good building, but they didn't spend excessively to preserve the heritage and the symbolism that is the Parliament building.
Very good. Madame de Bellefeuille.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Well, from the outset, Mr. Patrice, thank you, first of all, for the quality of the documents that you gave us in advance. It really gives us a very good idea. It gave us a good idea of what you were going to say today. So I think that you are proposing a process which will unfold over time, a process which begins in this parliament, but which will continue over several parliaments. I understand that you're asking for a commitment from all recognized parties in the House, a commitment to work on a committee regardless of whether whips and leaders change, the work will have to continue, because for me, this is a commitment which will lead to a new parliament, which will have been well thought out by the House administration, House officers, and by members of parliament who are part of that working group. Perhaps we can help you address some of the issues you've raised. There might be 78 fewer seats in the House of Commons one day. Pablo, what do you think of that? Well, that might be a solution for you. No, kidding aside, I do agree with Mr. Holland. There should be a joint committee. It's easier to work together on one body, and in that body we can exchange our points of view. We're not against the guiding principle idea either. Of course, MPs work on their own committees. You propose 2 hours every 2 weeks. And in the week that working group does not meet, should we consult with members from our own parties? Because it's not a decision from 1 or 2 MPs for each party. I think all members of parliament should have a say. So how do you see that working plan unfolding? So this working group would meet every 2 weeks, but in the meantime, in the time between those 2 meetings, how should we engage with members of our own parties? Well, I think that depends, but we are happy to adapt to the needs of the working group. Let me be frank. Some decisions will be easier to make. For instance, the Hall of Honor. I don't think anyone expects changes to be made to the Hall of Honor. However, some decisions will require more dialogue or more information to be taken into account. I say 2 hours every 2 weeks. That's a guideline. I might be speculating, but it might be 6 hours every 3 weeks. And then it might be a month or 2 before a decision is made. There's no hard and fast timetable here, which I'm proposing. It all depends on the topics, and it'll also depend on how much time the members on the workforce will need to reach a decision. And we will also have to provide you with the information you require. For instance, cost projections. You'll need those to make certain decisions. As far as I'm concerned, there's no question clearly, I'm expecting MPs to make a decision when they have the projected costs. If it takes a month to come up with those costs, then it'll take a month. And only then will a decision be taken. But it's certainly not, I don't want to pressure you at all by telling you you have to make a decision now, regardless of the costs. Thank you. I imagine you have some kind of a chronological order for these decisions, and that at some point when you have the cost projections, you might have an idea of when the major decisions have to be taken so the work on the ground can get started. Well, I don't have a hard timeline, but we need to make decisions on the House of Commons first, and also the lobbies on either side of the House of Commons, because that's one of your most important workplaces. As well, the visitor center, that's also important for us. And those are the things we have to make decisions on first. However, we don't want to pressure you into making decisions too quickly. However, we might present you with parallel designs or options so you can compare and contrast what options are out there. It might help you with your decisions. I'm looking for the word scenarios. We might come up with parallel scenarios so you can so we can present you with these scenarios once a basic decision has been made. I have a concern, and this is my last question, Mr. Chairman. What about spaces for MPs who are young parents? We have about a dozen young MPs who have young children in our caucus. And if we want to attract more women into politics and more young people, we have to create a workspace which is compatible with the needs of young families. So when this building was renovated, a family room was created. However, I don't think it's being used as well as it should be. So I'm just wondering whether you've given a thought to creating family rooms, a family room for each party, for instance, so that parliamentarians who have young children can have their spouses look after their child while the MP has to go into the House and give a speech. So I think this is one issue which is important. And clearly an effort was made to create such a space in this building. So I'm just letting you know that this is a concern for members in my caucus. And I think it's a good idea to think about this in future. And perhaps in the future, there will be an even greater need to accommodate MPs with young children. Thank you very much. Yes, we are taking that into account.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the comments of my colleagues, none of whom have senators in their caucus, about how we should just simply tell the Senate how it's going to be. I think that will be challenging, quite frankly, and I think we. But on that note, who is in charge, I guess, who has the final say on the common elements? For instance, though it is a shared building, we wouldn't have a situation where we on the House side would say, no, whatever it needs to do, we want 6 floors, we want it, I'd heard rumors about having to use one of the floors for services, as was indicated previously, how difficult it will be to run the appropriate wiring and all the rest of it. Like, we couldn't have a situation where at the Peace Tower it went from 6 to 5, right? Or 5 to 6 to 7. So who is in charge of the common elements? I guess the exterior. I don't assume that the interior fixtures will change at the Hall of Honor. Maybe I'm wrong there. So I guess if we know that there are common elements, who is making those decisions? Because I know senators are very particular about what they want to see. For instance, we've heard that they would like 10 committee rooms on the Senate side, and I just pull that out as an example. So 2 questions: who ensures the common elements? Who is that coming back to us? Or is that going to be made, we recommend, they look at it, they come, is that a whole circular discussion? And then, is there a challenge function at either the department or somewhere else where if it is deemed that one of the 2 occupants of the building is making requests that are simply outside of what is reality, does public services and procurement have a challenge function to say, you might want that, but it's not going to happen? Or is it always deferring to parliamentarians to have to make those decisions?
I'll take the easy one.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. It's an excellent question. It's a really important question. It's pretty central, in fact. The truth of the matter is, with a shared building and a shared facility, as we say here, there actually is a shared accountability on this one. So as was set out through the presentation, our department and our minister acts as custodian. Our department is responsible for doing basically the project management and project delivery. And we've adopted an interesting model for Centre Block especially, given the shared accountability. So the shared part, parliamentarians ultimately set what their needs are. And that's parliamentarians from both houses, supported by the respective administrations, and as was mentioned earlier in the presentation as well, the key supporting functions. So that would be the Library of Parliament and the Parliamentary Protective Service, with each of their responsibilities. So those requirements are set by those entities, and we work together. So what I mentioned was interesting and a bit novel for us. Jennifer's actually leading not just a PSPC team. Jennifer's leading an integrated project office that consists of representatives from, sure, the firms that we've hired to conduct the work, but we're actually running an integrated office that includes members of the House administration, members of the Senate administration. So different people are coming together, and we're actually working together on this to try to collectively work out the requirements. So in effect, there actually is there's what I'm going to call an on-the-ground challenge function that happens in real time as we move through this together, with the respective administrations all working together as a part of this integrated project office to try to pull common decisions together, because it is a common space, to your exact point.
I believe Mr. Julian has another
Well,
question.
I'd like to. I'm not done.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Straw,
But
please
Mr.
continue.
Patrice was going to speak here.
I just want to add something, as you know, like in terms of how the government works, how our system works. At the end of the day, the government is responsible, is holding the purse. They have the the financial initiative. So, for example, if the government feels that they don't want to spend that kind of money in terms of what the requirement has been sought, they cannot present those budget that would support those requirements. At the same time, as you know, it's Parliament who approves. So that's the higher principle in terms of what I would suggest, excessive requirements, either by the House, for example.
So I'm not sure if it's appropriate to ask Mr. Speaker if you have met with the minister. Have you talked to the minister about this project, the long-term vision plan, and perhaps at a future meeting it would be productive while we're discussing this to have, as Mr. Patrice has said, this is a government decision. The representative. There's a minister responsible for this file, and I think it would be it might be something we discuss. I don't want to put someone on the spot here, but we work through all these officials that are doing great work, but the minister is accountable for her department as well. So perhaps she would come here to either give what her perspective on this project as one of her files, or to hear from us once we've developed this this working group or the plan from this side, so that we're all on the same page as members of Parliament and the minister. So I think it would be productive. Just throw that out there, as Mr. Holland has, about timing of a meeting. I think it would be good for us to hear from the minister and to include her and her office as much as possible in this process, so that we're not running at cross purposes.
I have not met with the minister. I have met with Monsieur Patrice and his team for maybe a little bit more in-depth update of what's going on, briefing of what's going on so far in here, and I'm sure that's something that we can consider as a committee and go from there. Thank you, or as the board rather. Mr. Julian.
Thank you very much. No, this is an important and interesting discussion. So coming back to Mr. Holland's original comments about being concerned about a joint Senate process, I think it's fair to say we would all agree that there needs to be consultation with the Senate. But ultimately, the issues around some of the proposals, including the additional Senate meeting rooms, is something that I think we do need to examine as we go through this this process and set the principles that Ms. Bergen had suggested earlier. Ultimately, if we come up with recommendations, it's up to the government to make that decision and make that call, And if the Senate comes up with different recommendations, again, it's up to the government to make that call. But it seems to me that, hearing from you, and thank you very much for your feedback, it's sort of consolidated in my mind the idea that we move forward, not with a joint process, but consulting with the Senate, but putting forward what we think is best for preserving the center block, ensuring that we can function with a modernized center block, but without going into additional, I would say, luxuries that taxpayers are not willing to pay for and that really aren't needed. And so if we govern those principles that way and move forward, consulting with the Senate, but not necessarily integrating all of the requests in, we may end up with two slightly different proposals, but ultimately it would be up for the government to make that decision.
Any comments on that? No? Are there any other questions? Okay, we'll leave that. And the one point, I think there was a lot of discussion. It was very good. The one point we are taking and we'll have to act on is upon return from the constituency week, we'll make sure that we have a meeting, schedule it, and make sure it takes place, and then we can make some take a decisive action from there. In the meantime, I'd like all the members to really seriously think about how they see this committee forming and who will be on it, and we'll discuss it then. Perfect. Maintenant, nous allons continuer avec...
Moving on to point 5. Rather, I'm sorry, Madame de Bellefeuille. Thank you, Mr. Patrice. In fact, I wanted to say that I really appreciate that Mr. Patrice speaks slowly so the interpreter can follow him well, and the interpreter is doing a great job. In committee, when witnesses testify, Ms. Garrett, Ms. Culbut, English is your mother tongue, and you speak quickly. But I just want to say that the interpreter is excellent. She's been able to follow you. And but you, Mr. Patrice, I really appreciate the fact that you speak slowly. And so I can really follow you through the interpreter. And thank you to the interpreters. Well, that's a good point. Thank you. So we'll continue with the quarterly financial report for the third quarter of 2019 and 2020. Daniel Paquette, Chief Financial Officer, and Hélène Valiquette, Senior Director, Financial Planning Resources, Management and Corporate Policies. These two people will now take place to answer our questions.
Buses are his babies on your phone.
Okay. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm here to present the third quarterly financial report for 2019-2020. The first slide shows the various reports prepared by the administration in which you can find the financial information. These reports are all presented to members of the Board of Internal Economy in the course of 1 year, and these reports ensure that there is a good monitoring of the use of public funds.
Financial information up to the end of the third quarter with the financial information of the same period from the previous fiscal year. It is prepared using the expenditure basis of accounting, which is consistent with the Public Accounts of Canada. The report, the approved authorities include the House's mains and supplementary estimates, which have been approved here by the board. En date du 31 décembre, les autorités approuvées.
On December 31, authorities were approved for 2019-2020 in the amount of $520 $0.7 million, a decrease of $2.2 million or 0.4% compared to the previous fiscal year. The greatest changes had to do with a reduction of $9.3 million for MPs' retirement plans. This reduction was compensated by an increase of $3.4 million and $1.5 million for increases connected to the cost of living for members of parliament, senior officers, and for the administration. And there was also an increase of 1.4.
For 1920, the expenditures totaled $350.4 million compared to $348.1 for the same period last fiscal year. This represents an increase of $2.3 million or 0.7%. The expenditures are also presented by by type of cost. The most significant increase for our third quarter compared to the same period the previous year is the computer, office equipment, furniture, and fixtures. This has increased by $4.7 million. This is due to the investments associated with long-term vision and plan, as well as investments relating to the management of managed computers and constituency and RIT infrastructure. De plus, les dépenses liées au salaire.
Further expenditures for salaries and benefits in 2019-20 increased in the third quarter. This was mainly due to hiring new employees for various initiatives such as IT services and ridings, consulting services for MPs in their capacity as employers, and preparing activities related to the general election. Further, the increase in expenses with regard to repairs and maintenance is mostly due to costs associated with the long-term vision plan and the IT infrastructure as well. There was a decrease in expenses for transportation and telecommunications for 2019-2020 compared to the previous year, and this was mostly due to fewer travel in the election year.
Comparison between 1920 and 1819 utilization of our authorities. As of December 31st, it shows a slight increase of 0.7%. It is important to mention that the House promotes efficient use of resources and continuously strives to minimize the request for incremental funding whenever possible. So following this year's general election, we are closely monitoring the various considerations of the financial impact of what's been happening and making funding decisions throughout the year accordingly. Mr. Speaker, this concludes my presentation. Je peux répondre aux questions des membres.
I'm happy to answer any of your questions. What?
It is, eh? Are we trying to save heat or something? Juste une question, deux questions rapides.
Two quick questions. You said there was a decrease with regard to MPs' pensions. Why? Was there a change in the contributions? Yes, the employer's contributions share is based on an actuarial formula we receive from central agencies. So there was a decrease from one year to the next. Second question. There was an increase of $2.7 million for hiring new employees in the third quarter. It's basically cost of living increases, and some of our project costs a little more as well. Increase in capacity, did that require more people? Yes, we had transitional programs, and some employees were needed to service computers and IT systems in riding offices. The biggest increase went for a new team to support MPs in their capacity as employers.
By Mr. Julian.
One question I have is that which of the budget items does busing services for the precinct come under? And the reason I ask is because I've actually been hearing from a lot of members, I guess there's been a change and a cutback on buses. And I'm wondering, and I don't imagine it really reflects that much in terms of the numbers, but I've been hearing about it, so I thought this probably was a good opportunity to bring that issue forward.
It'll be through with our transportation. I don't have that level of detail here with me. That's really what proportion it does reflect, but we can make sure we come back to the members with an explanation of what the change in the policy has been.
Okay, we can maybe talk about that.
Yeah.
Very good. Mr. Julian.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci pour la présentation, Monsieur Paquet. Le matériel
Thank you, Mr. Paquette, for your presentation. You talked about IT equipment for MP's offices. That budget nearly doubled compared to last year. So I would like to know whether, because of the modernization of our IT equipment, do you expect another increase for next year? The other question I had was with regard to an early election. So if ever we have another general election in the coming months, who knows? What financial impact could that have? Well, when it comes to renewing the IT platform during an election period, normally every 4 years, that's an opportunity for us to upgrade all IT equipment, make sure that everything is functional in the parliamentary precinct. So that's normally when we do that, again, during an election time. And that's what explains an increase in cost. Do we expect another increase for next year? No, we don't. Because the current programs we have will be good for a while. Now, if there is an early election, well, in an election year, as I said, there are several things that happen. Travel budgets go down, and so we follow up to make sure that we have enough money in our budget so we don't have to come back to this venue. So we'll keep a close eye on those budgets. Thank you. Are there any other questions?
For Mrs. Bergen's question, is that something we want to broach right now? Okay.
I don't have that information.
I just saw someone come in. I'm just wondering if that's something that.
Yeah.
Okay, if it's okay, we can come back to it later, or do we want to? Okay. Well, it's no time like the present.
See, the differences in
The service reduction.
the reduction service in buses. It seems to be noticed by some of the members, and there's a question about why.
Did it create saving?
Has that actually happened, and why? If it did.
Specific since the opening of the West Block?
I would say just even between December, from December till now. But I think either way, if there's been a reduction in services since the opening of West Block.
The only reduction of service that we've made was this summer. At the adjournment of the House, we stopped the buses because there were construction at the Elgin Gate. So we've done a reduction of service for this summer, and we reinstated the service back after the election when the House came back in December.
But is there only just one green bus, one bus with the green sticker coming straight up to West Block?
We've made some adjustment, correct. We made some adjustment for the parliamentary circuit and the Wellington Street circuit. The problem we were having with we were making adjustment with the current fleet of buses that we're having, and we're currently looking into it to make sure that the adjustments are the best. And we'll continue to make the required adjustment. So you're saying that the buses with the green route, the Wellington one, that one has been deficient?
Yeah,
the parliamentary one, sorry?
Well, what I'm asking is, has there been a reduction in number of buses that come straight up here to West Block?
We had a period where we put more buses on the Wellington Street, and we adjusted the Parliament Hill route. The reason for that is because when we started in the West Block back in January last year, we had more buses on Parliament Hill, and with the reduction of service of the route, the length of the route further to the center block, the closure of the center block, we felt that the buses were following each other. So to better adjust, we put an additional bus on the Wellington Street, and we've reduced the Parliament one. Yes.
So there's not an overall reduction, but there is a reduction. There's been a change, and I would say that
We've
change-
made some adjustments,
Yeah,
yes.
and probably we need to have some discussion about that because members who are either coming for votes or coming for House duty or for
Okay.
various reasons to center block are fine. They've got to do the whole tour around. And when traffic is busy on Wellington, so you've got 3 or 4 buses that are going all around to Wellington, only one that's coming up straight to West Block. So that has been a reduction. However, we described it, it has been
Adjustments.
a reduction.
Yeah.
So we probably need to have some discussion on how that's affecting MPs.
Yes, and we will certainly look into that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
Very good. Are there any more questions on item 5? So we'll proceed to item 6, in alignment of carry forward policies. The presenters will be Daniel Paquet, Chief Financial Officer, José Fernandez, Deputy Chief Financial Officer. It's
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Je viens vous présenter une
I am presenting a submission in which we're asking for authorization to improve policies on carry forward funds for MPs, committee chairs, and House officers. The carry forward is an amount of money which has not been spent and which can be transferred to the next fiscal year. Carry forward encourages prudent management of funds because it gives a certain flexibility by allowing people to better plan the use of those remaining funds under the current policy. The way the carry forward is calculated can create disparities during the next fiscal year when there's an election. So the administration proposes to harmonize the methods of calculating carry forwards. So all MPs and committee chairs would have an easier time transitioning from into the next fiscal year after a general election.
and presiding officers, we are recommending that the current method used to calculate the carry forward for re-elected members and re-elected and reappointed presiding officers be applicable to newly elected and newly appointed members of these roles. This would mean that the maximum carry forward would be calculated as 5% of the annual budget instead of the prorated budget. For House officers, we are recommending to update to the carry forward policy in order to maximize the resources within a caucus in support of their parliamentary functions. House officers would continue to receive the carry forward based on their individual House officer budgets, but the total of these individual carry forwards would be compared to the carry forward amounts based on the combined House officer budget within a caucus. Should there be a difference between those two amounts, the difference would be redistributed to each House officers based on their budget's proportions of the total caucus budget. Les changements recommandés n'ont aucune.
The recommended changes would have no additional financial repercussions on the House. House administration would continue to ask for funds to be carried over in the supplementary estimates as per the current practices.
if I, Mr. Holland has a
Yeah,
proposal.
Mr. Speaker, I think if you seek it, you'll find unanimous consent to dispense with the presentation, not because of its quality, but because I think there's consent to move forward.
We have consent?
Yes.
We have consent. Good. So we'll move forward. Thank you. That was a very good presentation.
Amazingly convincing. Just, we have nothing to say.
This, okay. So number 7, utilisation des ressources de la Chambre.
Use of House resources to hold an event in a constituency office. Mr. Julian. I'll put Mr. Julian on my list right now. Now, before beginning discussion on item 7 on House resources to hold an event in a constituency office, I would like to inform the board that a communication was received yesterday afternoon on the part of the MP involved.
That the event was parliamentary in nature and that no partisan activities were held at or during the event. However, the member takes full responsibility for the error contained in the initial invitation and has enclosed a check reimbursing the cost of the event. Mr. Julian, did you have any comments?
I'm glad to hear that. I thought the email was not good, but the member's response was very quick in notifying the clerk, in withdrawing the email, and also in submitting the check. So, unless other members have comments, I have no further comments.
Any other comments? We have unanimous consent on this one. We'll move on. Very good.
We'll pause for a minute.
We'll pause for about 2 minutes and 45 seconds to allow everyone to leave while we go in camera. And it gives me a chance to go get something to eat.